Hi and welcome to the channel. I'm Lauro Miller and I make videos about programming. Last video we talked about numbers and today we start talking about strings. I divided the content into 4 videos. In this first one we're going to talk about an introduction to strings. In the second one we'll talk about some operations that we can perform. In the third one we'll talk about the match method of strings, which receives a regular expression and is a little bit more complex, so I thought it would make sense for us to have an entire video for it. And in the fourth one, we'll talk about template literals. If you don't know yet, for each video of this JavaScript series, there is an online exercise platform that you can use to practice everything we discuss here. Awesome. With that said, let's start with the first part, an introduction to strings in JavaScript. Here is what we're going to cover in this part. We're going to talk about string literals, how we can actually build strings. We'll talk about how we can access characters within strings. We'll also talk about concatenation, and we'll talk about converting other values to string. Here we'll talk both about primitive values and about objects and arrays. New file here, let's call it literals.js. And as we discussed in the JavaScript syntax overview course, or not the course, but the video, we can define strings by using single quotes by saying ABC like this. We can also use double quotes. Double quotes is just going to be ABC like this. And then we can also use backticks, right? Backticks is going to be like this. So in terms of behaviors, the single quotes and the double quotes, they are very similar, and the backwards or the backticks, they have a few special features that we'll explore when we talk about backticks and template literals. So let's create a couple of examples here. Single quotes, it's going to be ABC with single quotes. We can also use double quotes, and it's going to be ABC with double quotes, and we can use the backticks, and this is going to be with the backticks. Now we can use, sorry, this here should be like so. ABC, yes, now it's correct. So we can use double quotes within the single quotes string, is no problem. We can use single quotes within the double quotes string, and we can use both double and single quotes within the backticks. Okay, if I were to, let's come back here to the vanilla versions. If I were to compare them and console.log the output, so if I want to do console.log single quotes triple equal double quotes, this is going to be true, right? Because then backticks here, and just for the sake of completeness, backticks is triple or strictly equal to double quotes, and these are all true because strings are primitives, which means that the comparison happens by value. We can also escape a couple of characters if necessary, or create new characters or special characters by using the backslash, right? So if here I want to write, for example, I'm Lauro, I have an issue because there is a single quote here, which is actually, so JavaScript interprets this single quote as actually closing the string, and then this is not considered to be a string anymore. So if I want to use the single quotes within a single quote string, then I need to escape it with backslash. If I save this, then I should be able to see this on the screen. Of course, I need to console.log single quotes, and once I save this, then I should be able to see this on the screen. Now, if I want to add a tab, for example, I can add \t, and if I want to add a new line break, I can do \n. Let's save this and let's see how this prints on the screen. And there you go, and then there is a tab character here. You can see that once I select, it doesn't select spaces individually, but selects the whole tab. Then there's the M, and then there is the line break. Trivial thing for string literals. Let's now talk about how we can access characters within strings. So new file here, and let's call it accessing. Okay, just first word, because I think there will be no conflicts there. So how do we access characters within a string? Let's start by typing our string. My string is ABCDE, for example, and we can access characters like we would access elements of arrays. So I could say, for example, my string at position 2, which means index 2 that starts, so index counting starts at 0. Then here we have, so let me add a couple of slashes here to have the comments 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? So index 2, that would be equivalent to letter C. Let's console.log this on the screen. I'll save this. Let's run with node accessing.js, and you see that we get the character C. Now there are other ways that we can do it. We can also do console.log my str.char@, right? And then we can also pass the position here. Once I save this, I'll get the same one, C, and I can also look for a character. So if I were to write my str.indexOf, and here I can pass a search string. So let's say, for example, the character D, then this is going to return 3, right? So that would be 3 on the console. Once I run this, I have C, C, and 3. If the character is not found, so for example, Z, then this is going to output -1, right? That is how we should check for whether the index of operator found a character or not. It is -1 if it didn't find, it is 0 or more if it found, right? So if I save this, I get -1 here. Now, a gotcha, if you are not aware of how falsy and truthy values work, so it could be the case that you are thinking, okay, if my str.index of, let's say, A, and then you just do a check like this, right? And then you want to print here, oops, and then you want to print here on the screen. If this is true, then we'll say console.log string contains A. Otherwise, we're going to console.log string does not contain A. Now, you may be wondering, okay, yeah, the string contains A, but this will actually fall in the else case. And let's see why exactly. If I run this, you will see string does not contain A. And this is because index of can actually return 0 if the character is in the first position. And any character, actually, we could even pass a whole substring here. If it is in the first position, then it's going to return a 0, which means that this if statement is going to fail because 0 is false in JavaScript, right? So the correct way of checking whether we found something on the string or not is to compare with -1, at least when we are using the index of operator. And oops, sorry, of course, I made a mistake here. That should be different, right? So if the index of is different than -1, then that's correct. In string contains A. Now, if I pass a character here that doesn't exist, again, Z, and I save this and then I run, then I get the correct output. These are just a few methods to access characters and also substrings within a string. We'll discuss more of them in details in the upcoming parts. So the second and the third part when we talk about finding, extracting, and transforming strings, and also when we talk about matching strings with regular expressions. But for now, I'll take this as completed and we'll move on to discussing concatenating strings. So new file here, new file concatenating. .js. And there are two ways that we can concatenate strings. The first one is by using the plus operator, and the second one is by using the .concat method. I think we already discussed this, so I'm going to just skim through this. There is no big deal here. If we use the plus operator, that is going to be exactly the same as if we use the concat operator, okay? The plus operator is used much more often, so it's up to you which one you want to use, but it's no problem to use the plus. And it's also no problem to use the concat, apart from the fact that this one is a little bit more verbose. If I save this and I were to come here, clear node, what's the name of the file? Concatenating, yes. Node concatenating JS, and then I get AB, AB. Okay, so no big surprises here. Now we'll talk about converting other values to strings. So new file again, and we're going to say converting.js. To convert between primitive values and strings, we can just use the string call here, the string method, right? So I'm going to define a couple of variables. So my num is going to be equal to 10. My bool is going to be equal to true. let's say my symbol is going to be equal to symbol 4, and then we have my undef, for example, and this is going to be undefined, and we're going to have my null, and this is going to be null. Now, there are a few gotchas with undefined and null. We'll talk about them in a few minutes. So the first one is to simply call with string, right? Console.log string of my num. And then this is going to output 10, and 10 is going to be of type string. If I save this and I run in the console, node converting.js, this is going to output 10. Now this is of type string. I can confirm that to you if I run the type of operator. Right, so if I run the type of operator, this is going to print string on the screen. This can be used with any type of primitive values. So I can actually call string to my undef, and I can also call string to my num, my null. So if I save this and I print everything on the screen, everything works fine, there's no problem. Of course, the reversed, so the reverse operation is not possible here. I cannot convert my undefined to string and then back from string to undefined. This is not possible. It's the same thing with the boolean, right? So if I were to say console.log boolean of the string of my bool, this is actually going to be true, but if I pass a false boolean, for example, this console here is going to output true, right? If I run this, then I get an output of true, and that's because when I convert any boolean to a string, it simply returns either true, the string true, or the string false. And then when I try to pass this populated string to the boolean function, as we already saw in the past, any string that is different than an empty string is considered a truthy value. So this whole thing evaluates to true. So the operation, we cannot really go back if we concatenate or if we convert from boolean to a string. Okay, there are a few other ways that we can also convert between other types and strings, and the first one that I want to explore, or the second one, because the first one is calling the string method here, the second one is by concatenating the whole thing to an empty string, right? So if I were to again print the type of this whole operation, then this is going to output string on the screen. I'll just delete this to prevent avoid a few more prints on the console. But if I save this and then I come back here, run node converting, and I get a type of string. A third way to do that is to call the toString method, right? So mynum.toString. Now this works fine for anything that is not undefined nor null. This is going to output exactly the same as the other two, but if I were to call my undef.toString and then I run this in the console, I actually get an error, right? So it cannot read property toString of undefined. So the way to do here, this would be to actually call the string. So this string method here, and this is going to convert between undefined and strings. We have covered primitive values, but what about objects? Well, let's say that I have an object here, and this object has a first name property. And this first name property, to stick to tradition, let's say Lauro. What happens if I were to say console.log string my obj? Let's save this and let's run this in the console. If I run this, we get a very interesting, very cryptic message, object. So this representation is not really useful to us. Let's now try to, for example, see how arrays are represented. And arrays are represented by simply printing out its string versions or a concatenated version of its string elements, right? So we have each element here. Each element would then be converted to the string or to its string equivalent, and then we would concatenate everything with commas and print in the console. Let's save this and let's run. Oops, I need to print this out on the screen. So console.log string my array. Right, so if I were to print this on the screen, you see that we get 1, 2, and A. And if I pass the object here, my object, then I'm going to actually get again this weird object. Luckily for us, there is a way of determining or of modifying this default behavior. And we can actually do that by adding a nice, or by overriding a method called the toString method. So let's add a few other properties here. Let's call last name Müller and then age 27, at least as of the recording of this video. And a way that we can do it is by defining a function in the toString method, or by defining a method called toString, right? That's the more correct way to say it. And then we can say here return, let's say this dot first name, and then again this dot last name. If I save this, then now when I run in the console, then you will see that that object was actually replaced. So the string representation of that object is now the value that is returned by this toString method. That's it for today. Relatively light video. If you're familiar with strings, I think there was nothing new for you, but it's important that we are all at the same level before we move on to more advanced concepts. In the next video, we will talk about operations to find substrings, extract substrings, and transform strings. If you don't want to miss that and any of the upcoming videos of the channel, make sure to subscribe and you will get notifications when the videos are out. I'll see you in the next videos. Bye bye.